Welcome to the Self-Reliant Living Show, where we talk all about a self-reliant lifestyle to save money, live greener, eat healthier, and be prepared for anything so you can take care of the ones you love in good times and bad. I'm your host, Jennifer Osich, a homeschooling mom of 3 boys. I'm the author of the Preparedness Planner series, and my husband and I are the lead teachers of Self-Reliant School, a website dedicated to giving you the skills and confidence to take care of yourself and your community. Be sure to stop by and pick up your free videos from inside Self-Reliant School that will get you started growing, cooking, and preserving your own food today. You can pick these up at selfreliantschool.com/free. Now, on with the show. All right, we're talking about dehydrating, and that is the other form of preservation, food preservation. A lot of people think, when they think preserving food, they think just canning, but there's another preservation method, dehydrating, and I love this method. I have to be honest, I love all of them, but they all have their pros and cons, but this one is near and dear to my heart because this is the one that I actually started with. So this one has, I have fond memories of doing this because I've been dehydrating for a really, really long time. Okay, so I'm going to go over my definition of dehydrating. Dehydrating is actually one of the oldest forms of food preservation. And so there's varying degrees of what people call dry food and not dry food and all of that. Okay, so for example, zucchini chips need to be dried until they're crispy, right? Well, grapes, they can be dried until they don't have a lot of moisture left in them, but then, you can leave them with some moisture in them so that they're a little bit chewy. So there's different degrees of dehydrating something or drying something. Okay, for our purposes here, I'm going to define dehydrating as removing 90 to 95% of all the moisture in the food. Because in general, people want to dehydrate to preserve food and to put it up. Now, there are recipes and there's a whole sort of movement for live food or raw food that uses the dehydrator, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But for our purposes here, we're talking about food preservation. So in order to preserve food and to store it, you need to remove 90 to 95% of the moisture. So we're going to go with that definition. Okay, so top 5 reasons to use this method of preservation, dehydrating. The first one is to save money. Okay, so you can save a ton of money if you dehydrate almost anything. And one example I'll give you is kale chips. I love kale chips. And if you go and buy them in the store, they're $4 or $5 for a bag, and you get maybe five chips in there. And that's it. It's a lot of money for just that little bitty bit of kale chips. And so if you dehydrate them, you can almost dehydrate them, dehydrate a pound of kale for $5 or something. Not quite that. It's not quite that good, but it's substantial savings when you dehydrate yourself. And then also, of course, you can decide what kind of flavor you're going to put in your kale chips and all of that. But the money that you can save is really, it's a no-brainer. You can save a ton of money, and that's just one example. Okay, the next thing is preserve the harvest. So if you're gardening, right, you want to hold on to some of that food. You want to preserve what you've done. You've worked really hard in your garden all spring and all summer, and you want to take that food and you want to enjoy it as long as you can. And so if you dehydrate it, you can actually go ahead and enjoy some of that food in December or January or whenever it is that your off season is. Okay, dehydrating is a very special form of food preservation because it saves space. Unlike canning, you can dehydrate a lot of food and you can put it in a very, very small space. For example, I dehydrated some tomatoes the other day and I made tomato powder. Okay, so I bought a case of tomatoes and I was able to store the entire case of tomatoes in a quart-sized mason jar. So that's a lot of space, and you could not do that with canning. You'd have several jars of tomatoes. Okay, so along the same lines, dehydrating also is very lightweight, takes up less space, and then it's lighter. So if you are somebody who likes camping or hiking, or maybe you have a bug out bag that you want to keep stocked, then you can just put some dehydrated food in there and you're good to go. It's just that simple. And then the other thing is that it's a safe way of preserving food. Canning is too, so don't get me wrong there, but dehydrating has less of a learning curve. So there's not as many rules that you really need to learn before you start dehydrating. So that is I think a benefit to starting with dehydrating. Okay, so I'm gonna look at the comments really quick. And what is your favorite reason for dehydrating? Can anyone tell me that? I'm gonna make sure that I can get the comments here, because last week I was having a little trouble. Oh, hi Colleen, I see you there. Colleen is a master dehydrator as well, and she is in the comments. She is answering questions as well. So if I don't get to some, she will definitely. And Shayla, hi Shayla. Okay, we're going to move on to some methods of dehydrating. Okay, so you can use a dehydrator, which I highly recommend to dehydrate. You can also dry things, just air drying. For many years, people have done that with things like herbs, and they've just hung them up in a dry place, and over time herbs dry relatively fast, and so you can dehydrate things just with air. Okay, then another one is you can oven dry, and this is a tricky one because ovens, the modern ones don't go down, the temperature doesn't go down low enough to actually dehydrate the food. You're really cooking it if you don't get the temperature below 200 degrees. So 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is something that you'll have to look at your oven to see how low it goes, but it is possible to dehydrate in the oven, but it's a little trickier, like I said, because most ovens don't go down that low. Then there's also a way that you can make your own solar dehydrator. I know that there have been different plans for not only solar dehydrators, but I guess just homemade dehydrators where you attach some, you attach your food to a fan somehow, you lay it on some platform, and then you make it that way. Which works as well because, like I said, dehydrating is one of the oldest forms of food preservation, so they've done it for thousands and thousands of years. But I do want to say that even though they have done it for thousands of years, they haven't always done it successfully. And also, it depends on your climate. So if you do go ahead and try one of these homemade devices, it's definitely fun to try, but just be aware that you might not have as much success as you would in a dehydrator. Okay, and then you can also get super duper creative and you can use another tool. I've heard of people dehydrating food like in their car, because if you put your trays of food in the car, especially in the summertime, then you're simulating a dehydrator. So you could try that. It depends on your weather, your climate, and all that, whether it would work. I definitely wouldn't put anything that has a lot of juice with it in there. I would start out with something that's relatively dry to begin with, because that could be a mess, but that might be a fun project for you to try. Okay, so let's go on to the 8 steps to great dehydrated food. So this is actually the process that I follow. So let me just start with preparation. Okay, so you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with your food before you place it in the dehydrator. So are you going to cut it? Are you going to slice it? Are you going to peel it? You need to figure that out so that you know what your preparation is. And then one other thing I want to say with preparation, this first step, is that keep in mind that when you dehydrate something, if you get the pieces, the slices, the chunks, whatever you're doing, uniform, then you're going to have your food be dehydrated at the same time. If you have a huge chunk of something and then a little bitty slice of something else, if your slices are not uniform, some are super thick and some are super thin, then your food is not going to get done at the same time. So that's the reason it's kind of important to think about that before you put food in the dehydrator. Okay, pre-treatment. That is number 2 in the process. You need to find out whether the food that you're going to dehydrate needs a pre-treatment. And by that, I mean something that's going to prevent oxidation, or something that is going to help reconstitute the food faster, like blanching. Then some fruit you might need to check. And so that's a dehydrating term. You might need to actually puncture the skin of some fruit. Grapes are like that. Cherries are like that. Cherries are kind of a no-brainer because you have to de-seed, take the seed out, de-seed them. Is that even a word? I don't know, but take the seed out. So in that process, you're checking the fruit. So blueberries is another one that you might have to check. Just depends on how big they are. So that's something that you might have to do. Pureeing, going ahead and not only blanching, but also completely cooking the food might also be a pre-treatment that you need to do. So the way that you know that is it depends on what you're going to use the food for. And then oxidation, of course, those are treatments that you would give fruit even if you weren't going to dehydrate it. So then the next thing is you want to figure out how you're going to place this food in the dehydrator, because believe it or not, it does matter. If you are dehydrating kale chips, for example, you may need to skip a few trays depending on your dehydrator. And in this example, I'm talking about an Excalibur, which is the square dehydrator with the trays that just slide out. So the other type of dehydrator is the stackable kind that has the circle trays. Well, I'm talking about an Excalibur here. You would need to probably skip trays if you were going to dehydrate kale chips. Otherwise, they're going to crumble when you take them out. So that's just one example, but there are others. So you need to decide on the placement, and that's going to also help you in deciding how much you can dehydrate at one time and how much prep that you need to do. Then you're going to need to decide on the temperature of what you're what temperature you're going to dehydrate at. So this matters in several situations, and let me just talk about a few of them. The first one would be just like I mentioned a bit ago about raw food. If you are interested in preserving enzymes and you are interested in keeping your food what they call a living food or a raw food, you're going to want to have the temperature be below 118 degrees. And that's going to keep your food what they call living, which means the enzymes are intact and they can benefit you when you eat the food. So you're going to need to know the temperature if you want to keep it a raw food. Okay, so then the next thing you're going to want to know is a temperature for raw meat, like beef jerky. So you're going to want to understand that you need to dehydrate raw meat at the highest possible setting, and there are some meats that you just really can't dehydrate depending on the dehydrator that you have. So knowing the temperature that you need to dehydrate at is really important. Okay, so the next thing I have on here is check time. And what that means basically is that some food you're going to need to flip, you're going to need to check to make sure the temperature is appropriate, to make sure nothing has happened, to make sure that your dehydrator is not running hot or running cool. So there are some foods that you'll need to check at certain intervals in the dehydrating process. And then you'll want to know about the total time it's going to take to dehydrate a certain food, because it is going to take longer for some foods than others. Then on top of that, it is going to depend on your environment. If you live in a drier climate, it may not take as long for your food to dehydrate because you've started out with a drier food because of your climate, and then vice versa. If you live in a humid environment, then you may need to dehydrate at a longer time or a total time. Okay, the next thing that you need to consider is storage. Whether you want to place your food in a plastic bag or vacuum seal it, or maybe place it in a Mylar bag. And you need to determine this, because if you want it to last a good long time, then you are going to need to vacuum seal it, because just like I was talking about with the temperature, depending on your environment, moisture will seep back into the food. So if you're, like I said, if you live in a tropical environment, it's really important that you vacuum seal just right out of the dehydrator. And it just depends on how long that you want to keep your food for. I know that my kale chips go really fast, so I don't even bother. Vacuum sealing those. Those just go in a container and they're eaten within like 24 hours, really fast. But then there are other things like dried onions, especially powders would fall into this category, that I want to keep for a while. So I need to realize and determine what kind of storage I'm going to put them in right out of the dehydrator. And then the final step would be reconstituting your food, because that's what we're doing all this for, right? We want to use the food in our meals or as snacks. And so you need to decide how you're going to reconstitute it and when you're going to reconstitute it, because then that will determine some other factors as well. So in this circumstance, in dehydrating, it's always good to begin with the end in mind. Okay, so let's talk about safety. So I alluded to this just a minute ago, and we talked about canning safety, in that dehydrating safety and canning safety are a little different. In my opinion, they're both easy, and they're both easily attainable, and you shouldn't be scared of either. But dehydrating doesn't have those hard and fast rules like canning does. And so you have a little bit more leeway with the safety issues, but at the same time, you're going to need to be a little bit more observant, because if there's mold on your food, of course you wouldn't want to eat it. If it smells bad, you wouldn't want to eat it. So I do believe that it's harder to get yourself in a pickle. See what I did there, pickle? With dehydrating, because it is a little bit more obvious with the safety concerns, but still there are some. And then there are some things that you would not want to put in your dehydrator. You would not want to can. Oh, listen to me, can. I'm on canning because I said canning. You would not want to dehydrate, and that is high foods, like high fat foods like avocados or hard cheese. I do see that a lot online. People are dehydrating hard cheese. Just don't do that. It's not safe, and you're not going to get a good product when you reconstitute. It's going to be yucky and gooey, so just don't do that. And also things like bacon, that's a high fat meat, and in my opinion that is not safe to dehydrate. All right, so let's talk about those things that are gray areas, and that is milk, eggs, ground beef, chicken, ham. Okay, so those things that I get a lot of questions. Is it safe to dehydrate these things or not? Well, yes and no. So let me take them one at a time, because I think this is pretty important. Like I said, I see a lot of people dehydrating these things and they don't do it in a safe way. So let me go over these food items one at a time and hopefully shed some light on the safety issues. Okay, so milk. It is fine to dehydrate milk, but there is a caveat, and that is that you need to store it in the refrigerator, and that means skim milk too. When you buy dry milk from the store, that is a whole different process. That's not just dehydration. They do some other things to that milk that you buy in the store, and so that's the reason it is shelf stable. When you dehydrate at home, you don't have that process, and it is just dehydrating. You can dehydrate it, you can dehydrate whole milk, but it must be stored in the refrigerator because, well, whole milk, that's pretty obvious because I just said high-fat foods, and that's a high-fat food. And the other thing is that even skim milk, because the proteins will break down at room temperature. So you really need to store it in the refrigerator. And then also remember, even if you do store it in the refrigerator, it is going to have a limited shelf life. It's not going to last forever in there. It will last a good long time, but it's not going to last forever. The benefits to dehydrating milk would be that you could extend the life, plus it wouldn't take up as much space as freezing milk. So, and then yogurt, soft cheese, same thing. It's safe to dehydrate it as long as you store your dehydrated milk, yogurt, soft cheese in the refrigerator. Okay, so eggs. Here's another one, and I see this a lot everywhere online. I see blog posts and Facebook posts and all of that. Eggs. Is it safe to dehydrate eggs? Yes, it is safe to dehydrate eggs. Well, let me just say, with another caveat, with two actually. The first one is you must use pasteurized eggs to dehydrate raw eggs. So before you put them in the dehydrator, you need to pasteurize them. And that means bringing them up to a certain temperature for a couple of minutes before you cool them down quickly, and then they're pasteurized, and if you crack them open, they look exactly like raw eggs, but they have been pasteurized because you've brought them up to a certain temperature to kill all of the bacteria that might be in them, on them, whatever. Okay, so it is safe to do it if you pasteurize your eggs first, your raw eggs, and then if you cook your eggs first, then it is safe to go ahead and dehydrate them. But again, you must store them in the refrigerator, because if you don't, they're a high-fat food and they will break down, they will go rancid, and then all of your effort would be for naught. So you don't want to do that. You want to store them in the refrigerator and then make that space saving for you. This is really helpful if you have backyard chickens, or if you live on a farm, or if you just have access to a lot of eggs. So when you reconstitute cooked eggs, they don't taste quite like regular eggs. So if I were you, I would just do like a test batch and see if you like the taste, and then you can go from there. But you must pasteurize raw eggs in order to dehydrate them for safety. Okay, let's move on to meat. So before we go into the different kinds of meat, the beef jerky, ground beef, chicken, all of that, I want to explain a little bit about the different dehydrators. There's a bunch of different dehydrators on the market. There's just a ton of choices, but the two main ones that people get when they're really serious about dehydrating, the two ones that compete with each other are the Excalibur and the Nesco. And the Excalibur will go to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, and the Nesco will go to 155 degrees Fahrenheit. So keep that in mind, because when you dehydrate beef jerky, you need to have your dehydrator, your temperature set to 145 degrees Fahrenheit in order to keep that beef jerky safe. So you want to, I set mine on the highest that it will go, but you need to make sure that it's at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit. If your dehydrator does not go that high, do not make beef jerky in it, because that's just not safe. Okay, so ground beef. If you're making jerky, it's fine. Like I said, if your dehydrator goes up to 165 degrees. So if you're making ground beef jerky, you need to keep that in mind as well, because the recommended cooking time for ground beef jerky is 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So you need to set that. You set your dehydrator on the highest it will go. And obviously you can't do that in a Nesco because it only goes to 155 degrees. So knowing these temperatures is really, really important in terms of dehydrating meat and safety, because you always want to practice safe food handling. Okay, so chicken. Can you dehydrate chicken? Only if it's cooked. Only if it's cooked first, you can dehydrate it. Do not dehydrate raw chicken. Raw chicken needs to be cooked at 165 degrees. Well, you may be saying, well, Jennifer, my Excalibur goes to 165 degrees. What's up with that? Okay, here's what's up. The thing is that the Excalibur will go to 165 degrees, but that doesn't mean that it is 165 degrees the entire dehydrating time. So in my opinion, and in general safety, you want to make sure that your dehydrator is going to go slightly above the recommended cook time. Okay, so the Excalibur will not do that with chicken because, like I said, just because it's set to a certain temperature does not mean the entire inside of the dehydrator is that temperature. It's probably it probably varies actually. Some parts of it are a little hotter and some parts are a little cooler. So it is not safe to dehydrate raw chicken. Cooked chicken, fine. Okay, so ham or pork. Pork you need to cook at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and then honestly, I'm just going to tell you, I don't trust pork to dehydrate. If you want to dehydrate ham, which is something that's already been processed, and you buy a ham, that's one thing. But because there are so many things that can go wrong with pork, I do not dehydrate raw pork. So even though the temperature is, says it's in the safety range, I just do not trust it. So there is that. And then also fish and salmon, yes, it is okay to dehydrate raw fish. And I'm talking about salmon because you make salmon jerky, because you need to have a salmon at 145 degrees Fahrenheit for it to be safe. So as long as your dehydrator goes above that, and I would say a good 5 degrees to be safe, then it is okay to dehydrate that raw salmon. Okay, and then if you go to the show notes, I will have a link to where I'm getting all of my temperatures so you can check for yourself, make notes, and keep those notes handy in your kitchen, because this is important in terms of safety. So what about equipment? What do you need to get started? Well, you do, in my opinion, need a dehydrator, because like I said before, the other forms of dehydration are ancient, but they're not always foolproof. So in order for you to take advantage of dehydrating and set yourself up for success, I really highly recommend that you get a dehydrator. And the two that I have are the Excalibur, and then I have a Nesco. Okay, so the Excalibur, like I mentioned before, that's the square kind, and it has the trays that slide out. And the difference really between the Nesco and the Excalibur is where the fan is. And I have a video that I did a comparison with the Excalibur and the Nesco, and I will link to that in the show notes. So be sure to check out the show notes so that you can watch that video and you can see exactly what I think about both of those dehydrators. Okay. Then if you are going to dehydrate in something else besides those two, because I highly recommend those two, then you need to make sure that your dehydrator has a temperature indicator. And if it does not, then you can stick a thermometer inside there to see what your temperature is with your dehydrator. Because like I said, you need to know the temperature inside of your dehydrator if you are going to go ahead and attempt to make beef jerky or dehydrate any other kind of raw meat. So that is something that you need to be aware of. Okay, So I'm going to take one look here at some of the comments. Okay, somebody's asking about a homemade dehydrator that's in a wood box. And like I said, you need to, if you have that, Connie is asking about that. If you have a homemade dehydrator, what you need to do is make sure that you are able to take the temperature. So if there's not one that you guys have built into it, then you can just get a regular meat thermometer or oven thermometer and put it in there and make sure that you know what the temperature is when you're dehydrating the things that are really critical in terms of temperature. So, okay, so getting started with your dehydrator, like I said, I really feel strongly that you need a dehydrator. And you can dry food using some of the other methods. You can do experiments and things like that. But I just want to set you up for success because those methods are not foolproof. And you know, and it depends a lot on where you live. If you live in a dry climate, you may have a lot of luck with other forms of drying. But if you live in a humid environment, I'm thinking you might not. So I just want to warn you about that, and then also tell you that I recommend getting a dehydrator. And you can get them fairly inexpensively. You don't have to start out with a Excalibur or a Nesco. You can start out you know, with just a Walmart special or something like that, because if you start with fruit or vegetables and then you decide, you know, this is something that you want to do, then you can go ahead and invest later. But you can, you know, try it out on one of the more reasonably priced dehydrators and see how you like it. Just be aware of making beef jerky and raw meat and those sorts of things in those other dehydrators that don't have the temperature indicators. So it is super easy, and it is, you know, it's a fun thing to do with kids. So it also will help in terms of getting your kids on board with preserving food, because if you take zucchini chips or pineapple chips, or we just recently dehydrated some cherries, and you give them to your kids, they will just love you and they'll just want to know when the next batch is going to be done. And that trick also works with husbands too. So getting started is pretty easy, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, so some common questions I'm going to go over really quick because I get a lot of questions about dehydrating, and I just want to go over some of those because you might be wondering, and or it might come up later. Okay, why didn't my food mold? People will ask me, it came out of the dehydrator, I put it up, and then I went to eat it and it's moldy. Well, the reason that it's moldy is because it still had moisture in them. So there are a couple things you can do. You can keep records and make sure that, you know, you get your food to a certain dryness. You can keep records in terms of how long it usually takes you to dehydrate a certain food. And if it did mold, then you'll know, well, hey, I need it to go longer. You can put it out on your counter and watch it for a couple of days. If you see any signs of moisture in the jar or the container, then you know straight away to get it back in the dehydrator and get that taken care of. You can also take your dehydrated food and you can put it in the freezer for a couple of days. And I find that this helps to continue the drying process. Now, it's not a proven method, and there's not, you know, science behind it. I'm just telling you my own experience. That's what I have done before, and I find that it does dry things out even more. I also do that if I have something that I have dried outside, because you know, it happens. Bugs can get in your dehydrator, even though it's not an airtight situation, and so bugs can get in there. Usually when your dehydrator is on, the heat will keep the bugs away, but then mine has a timer and it'll go off, and so I will put my food in the freezer for a couple of days, and I make sure that there's no yucky eggs or anything like that. Those are all neutralized, and you know, so nothing's going to hatch. And then, like I said, I find that that helps dry out the food even more. Okay. How do I store my dehydrated food? Well, we touched on that before. You want to store it in an airtight container if you're going to store it for longer than a couple of days. Be sure the food that I mentioned that needs to be stored in the refrigerator, the eggs, the meat, all of those things, you store those in the refrigerator. You can store them in a mason jar. That's my favorite way to store dehydrated food. You can even go as far as getting a Mylar bag and putting dehydrated food in that. You just need to really, really make sure that it is completely dry before you put it in a Mylar bag. And then, how do I know if I need to cook my food before I dehydrate it? And this one is one of those things where, again, you need to keep the end in mind. And this is a general rule. It's not a hard, fast rule, but it's a general rule. If you are going to consume the food cooked, in other words, when you reconstitute it, you're going to go ahead and put it in a casserole or a soup or something like that, then you're going to want to cook it or blanch it first. Now, that is not always the case. There are some exceptions, but if you need a rule to follow, that is one that generally works. So if you're going to, like I said, if you're going to cook, I'm just trying to think like squash. If you wanted to dehydrate some squash, you would want to blanch that first. Then there are some things that are gray areas like carrots. I find that if I cook them first or not, they kind of do the same thing. So a lot of it is your own like trial and error, but as a general rule, I would keep the end in mind, and if you are going to use it in a cooked food, then go ahead and blanch or cook it first, and that will also help it reconstitute faster. So there you go. So my final thoughts on dehydrating, because I'm trying, like I said, I'm going a little fast here. I got something really special I want to share with you in just a second, so don't go anywhere. Okay, so my final thoughts are dehydrating is simple, easy, super fun. You can make your own powders. You can make your own instant rice. You can make all of these wonderful things without the junk in them that you see when you buy them at the store. So dehydrated food is, like I said, it's one of my favorite ways to preserve food. And you can make your own stuff, and it's just, it's one of those things that never gets old. Making your own garlic powder, making your own kale powder. It's so cool. And kale chips and zucchini chips, and the list goes on and on. So it is super fun. Okay, so here is the big surprise. I want to say, first of all, happy 4th of July early. I know that we're still, there's just one more day in June if you are listening to the replay or listening to the podcast. But we are having a very, very special 4th of July event on selfreliantschool.com. And here's how it's going to work. Okay, it's a treasure hunt. So this is fun, right? So if you're not into fun and all of that stuff, and you think this might be a drudgery, and I have to do this, this is probably not for you. This is a fun thing. Okay, so it's a treasure hunt, and what we're going to do, or what we're doing, because it's going to start right after this broadcast. So if you go to the site, in the sidebar, you're going to see a firecracker. So in most of the, and they're on the different pages, so what you would want to do is to sort of browse through selfreliantschool.com, and in the sidebars you'll see some different fireworks. And one of them will take you to a super special offer, and this is 50% off. I mean, we really don't ever do this for our membership. So you can sign up today or tomorrow or the next day or the next day. It's going to end on July 4th, okay? So you can sign up at 50% off. So, but here's the thing. You can go, and it's a treasure hunt to find one special firecracker. And you can tell that it's a special firecracker because the tops of the rockets are a little bit different colored. They're Self-Reliant School colors. Okay, so if you find that firecracker, you want to click on it, and that's the one, if you find it, that's the one that you click on to win a free 1-year membership. Okay, so here's how that's going to work. We're giving away one per day until July 4th. So we're giving away, 4 in total? And we're giving away one every day. If you're the first one to find that firecracker, then you click on it and there will be a place for you to put your name and your email, because of course we have to notify you that you have won. And what that will do is that will send me an email and it will have a timestamp on it. So the first person who does that will get a free membership to Self-Reliant School. And like I said, there's one per day. So the first person each day will get a free 1-year membership. But you have to find that very special firecracker. So go ahead and do that. And then the reason that I'm having you put your name and your email in there is because 50 people might get there at the same time. So I need to have a way of finding that first person, and that will be on the timestamp of your email. So then also, if you find it and you put in your information, be sure to watch your email address, because I need to be able to verify that email really quickly. So the rules and terms are on that page if you're able to find it. And then, like I said, if you do not want to go through all that trouble and you're like, oh, this is ridiculous, I don't have time to sit here and click all this stuff, then you can just go to any page and you'll have a firecracker on there, and you can click the firecracker and see our special prices for our membership, because it's really, really discounted. It's super low. Like I said, we don't ever do this, but we're doing it because of Independence Day. We're celebrating this new show, and we are so excited that you are here with us celebrating and watching. Okay, so if you have joined in the middle, I just want to say one more time that my name is Jennifer Osich, and the website to go to for the firecrackers is selfreliantschool.com. If you are brand new and you just kind of want to dip your feet in the water, don't know what we're all about, go to selfreliantschool.com/free, and you can get some free videos. And there is a dehydrating one, so you can go sign up for those free videos, and that will let you know what we're all about and what we do. Okay, so I am going to hop off of here so I can make sure all of my the treasure hunt is going to run smoothly. Thank you all for joining me, and I am going to go through and I'm going to answer questions. And Colleen, I love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. She has been answering questions for me, and I just love her because I have been able to look in the camera and talk to you, straight in the camera, and she has been in there answering questions. So big shout out to Colleen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so remember, being self-reliant isn't about you or being selfish. It's about taking care of yourself so you can take care of the ones that you love. Take care until we talk again. I'm so glad you could join me today. Here's what to do next. Head over to selfreliantlife.tv to pick up the show notes for this episode and to watch replays of older episodes. To go directly to the show notes for this episode, go to selfreliantlife.tv, and then without a space, type a / and then the number of today's episode. You can watch this show live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, live on Facebook or the Periscope app. Don't forget to stop by selfreliantschool.com/free to get your free Self-Reliant School videos that will help you get started living a self-reliant life. Also, if you're listening to this show as a podcast and you've liked what you've heard today, please subscribe through Stitcher, iTunes, or your favorite podcast app. If you're on a mobile device, just search for the Self-Reliant Living Show. If you're on a laptop or desktop, just go to selfreliantlife.tv/iTunes. And while you're there, please leave a review. I love to hear from you. You leaving feedback makes it easier for others that are interested in living a self-reliant life to find my podcast. Take care until we talk again.